For roughly 4% of people, the number 7 is always red, Tuesday tastes like mint, or a violin sound appears as a shimmering blue-green shape floating in space. This is synesthesia, a neurological condition in which stimulation of one sense automatically and involuntarily triggers a perception in a second, unrelated sense. It is not a disorder in the traditional sense, and it may reveal something important about how perception works in every human brain. Synesthesia is a neurological phenomenon in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway automatically and involuntarily triggers an experience in a second, unrelated pathway. Critically, synesthetic experiences must meet specific criteria to be considered genuine. They must be involuntary and cannot be suppressed by effort. They must be highly consistent over time. The same stimulus reliably produces the same synesthetic experience years later, and they are typically present since early childhood. Estimates suggest synesthesia occurs in roughly 2 to 4% of the population, though rates vary by the specific type being measured. Grapheme-color synesthesia, in which specific letters or numbers automatically evoke specific colors, is the most common and most extensively researched form. A synesthete might consistently perceive the letter A as red and the number 3 as green, with these associations remaining stable across testing sessions separated by years, unlike associations most non-synesthetes would make if asked to guess, which show far greater variability. Other documented forms include chromesthesia, where sounds evoke colors, lexical gustatory synesthesia, where words evoke specific tastes, and spatial sequence synesthesia, where sequences like numbers or months are perceived as occupying specific locations in space. The cross-activation theory, proposed by Vilayana Ramachandran and Edward Hubbard, suggests synesthesia arises from atypically dense neural connections between adjacent brain regions that process different types of information. In grapheme-color synesthesia, the brain region processing visual number and letter forms lies directly adjacent to color processing regions in the fusiform gyrus. The theory proposes that synesthetes have excess neural connections or reduced pruning of connections during development between these neighboring regions, causing activation in one area to directly trigger activation in the neighboring area. An alternative model, disinhibited feedback theory, proposes that the neural connections underlying cross-sensory experiences exist in all human brains, reflecting the genuinely interconnected nature of sensory processing, but are normally suppressed by inhibitory feedback mechanisms that keep sensory channels experienced as distinct. In synesthetes, this theory holds. Inhibition is reduced, allowing normally suppressed cross-sensory signals to reach conscious awareness. This model is supported by evidence that some non-synesthetes can be induced to experience synesthesia-like effects through certain drugs, sensory deprivation, or specific perceptual training, suggesting the underlying connectivity may be a universal, not exceptional, feature of the brain. Research consistently shows that synesthetes often display superior memory performance, particularly for information that engages their specific synesthetic associations. A grapheme-color synesthete may find it easier to remember long strings of numbers because each digit carries an additional, automatic color cue that functions as a built-in mnemonic, effectively giving them extra encoding information for free. This memory advantage is not universal across all cognitive tasks, but it is a consistently replicated finding in synesthesia research and offers insight into how additional, automatically generated sensory associations can enhance encoding and retrieval. Multiple studies have found synesthesia to be more prevalent among artists, musicians, novelists, and poets than in the general population, a finding that has generated considerable interest in the relationship between cross-sensory perception and creative cognition. One proposed explanation is that the tendency toward increased neural connectivity or reduced inhibition that produces synesthesia may also facilitate the unusual, cross-domain associations and metaphorical thinking that are central to creative work. This remains a correlational and actively researched area, but it suggests synesthesia may be less a disorder and more a distinctive cognitive style with genuine advantages in specific domains. Synesthesia challenges the intuitive assumption that our senses operate as entirely separate channels, revealing instead that the boundaries between sensory modalities may be more permeable and more universal than most people ever consciously experience. For synesthetes, that permeability is simply part of everyday perception,